Ron. I will be more than welcome to tell you anything I know about Ron. I won't say that it's necessarily true, but I make up stories as I go because I know he can make up the same thing. And it's always a pleasure to be anywhere to speak about the Bible, in particular about our Lord. And didn't realize the connections that I've already known of so many. Many of you I may not know. Many of you don't know me. That's okay, as long as we all know the Lord. That's the main thing. That He's an example, and He's an example of sacrifice. Sometimes when I get assignments, I generally ask this question to myself. I don't know if you ever ask this question when preachers get up to speak, but here's the question. So what? So what? So He was an example of sacrifice. What is that supposed to mean to me? If it doesn't have a practical application to my own personal life, it becomes tough to talk about topics. There are a lot of subjects out here in the world I don't really care a whole lot about. I was at Bible camp last week, Camp Nayati down here in Guntersville, and I teach the 11th grade through first year of college students. And I found out that one of the students down there had been playing Pokemon Go for 4 straight days. And I asked one of our members there at Bethel, who also has that little app on their phone, what in the world are you looking at and what are you talking about? And this person proceeded to try to help me get it on my phone. And I said, I don't want anybody to know that personal information about me, to be honest with you. But so what? So what? In 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse 12, the Apostle Paul told Timothy, let no man despise thy youth, but be thou an example of the believers in word and conversation and charity and spirit and faith and purity. Now, all 6 of those items in that 12th verse were also true of Jesus Christ. In word, manner of life, in love, spirit, attitude, faith, purity. Now, he becomes the prime example of that. Now, Timothy, you're to be an example. Obviously, you're to be an example to the world, but it didn't say to the world. It says to be an example of the believers. And the indicator there is, as a young man, you are to show spiritual maturity. And evidently he could and did. In 1 Corinthians chapter 11 and verse 1, Paul said, be you followers or imitators, literally mimics of me, as I also am of Christ. So here's how this pattern works. Jesus becomes the example. Paul took that example to heart. And then Paul showed that and taught that to Timothy. And Timothy, you're to pass that on to others. And as we say, the change just keeps on going from generation to generation all the way to the Lord returns. Hebrews 12 and verse 2, it says, looking unto Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down at the right hand of God. So of all the examples of faith in Hebrews 11 and that great cloud of witnesses, chapter 12, verse 1, who is the ultimate, of which all are to lean on, the author and the finisher of our faith. And it all comes down to the ultimate price he paid. When he could have done everything else in the world, he paid the ultimate price. So what does his life and his sacrifice have anything to do with me? And what does it have anything to do with you? Being a Wednesday night crowd, I don't think I have to stand here and tell you that Jesus died for the sins of the whole world and that it had to be on the cross in order for you and me to go to heaven. I think that's something you already know. But the fact of the matter is, there are some applications that come with Jesus leaving heaven and coming down here to this earth and being our example, all the way to the ultimate example. And the ultimate example is, when you've given everything you possibly could give, what else is there left for you to give? And the bottom line is your life. Your life. You remember what Satan said to God about Job? You know, does Job serve God for nothing? You know, the idea is the reason you are receiving all this service from Job is because you give him all these things. And you take away these things from him, he'll curse you to your face. Well, Job didn't do that, did he? And then Satan comes again, according to Job chapter 2, and says, skin for skin. All will a man give for his what? For his life. You let me touch him, and he'll curse you. By the way, the Lord did let Satan touch him. Spared his life. Job didn't understand all of what was going on. Of course, if he had read the first 2 chapters, he'd have known, but he didn't know the first 2 chapters. I'm not real sure after the whole book of Job was written that maybe Job read it and it says, well, it makes sense now, because knowing now chapters 1 and 2, it makes a lot of sense. How many of you have ever had anything you're struggling with? Physical pain, emotional pain, mental pain, maybe even spiritual. And you ask the question, why? Where do you get your answer? See, sometimes, folks, we don't get our answers in this life. Oh, I know the song in that psalm book. Tempted and tried, we're oft made to wonder why it should be thus all the day long, while there are others living about us, never molested though in the wrong. Farther along what? We'll know all about it. And then, of course, that song is not a death dirge, by the way. It's a cheery song. How do I know that? Cheer up, my brother, live in the sunshine. See, that song getting to be sung, drug into the dirt, as though you're going down a funeral, path. That's a happy song. Well, Lord, I'm struggling. I'm going through all this stuff, and I don't understand. Guess what? Job was that way. As a matter of fact, I guess we're all that way. So what do I really need in view of all? Understand, what is the practical value of that? What is the reason for all that? Now, I've got a son who's an engineer. He's got a PhD in engineering, and he can say, well, Dad, this is what all this means. And I said, well, I'm a preacher, okay? You do your job, and I'll do mine, okay? But every once in a while in that math book, outside those problems, it'd give you a word problem. Y'all remember word problems? And word problems were the attempt to try to explain, hoping that you understood these equations and could put this word problem into an equation and work it. A word problem was the attempt to explain an illustration of what all of these 25 problems were all about. This is how it applies to life. By the way, I didn't learn that till I was an adult. My teacher didn't teach me that. She said, here, you got 2 word problems on your test. That was the worst for me. Because, by the way, if you can't put that word problem into an equation in the correct form, you've already missed that question. Did y'all know that? Because you can put it out in a form and then work it and get an answer and say, that wasn't even the right equations to put in that sentence. So what is it? Well, give me an example. Give me an example. Give me an example of a person who could hold his tongue. Jesus Christ. Give me an example of a person who did good unto others. Jesus Christ. Give me an example of how I am really to get something out of worship. Jesus Christ. Tell me what you expect out of me, Lord, almost in every aspect of my life. Just look at my son. You remember when John 14, when Jesus said, in my Father's house are many mansions, I go to prepare a place for you. He says, I'm the way, the truth, and the life. And Philip said, just show us the Father. Just show us the Father, and that suffices us. In other words, that'll satisfy us. And what did Jesus say? Philip, how long have I been with you? He that has seen me has seen the Father. Jesus is not saying he's the Father. But Jesus is saying, if you want to know who the Father is, just look at me. If you want to know what the Father's will is, just look at me. So that simplifies things, and to show me every aspect of how I'm to walk and talk. Okay? There are 2 passages in the New Testament where the Bible specifically says that Jesus is our example. Now, I've already alluded to it, like Hebrews 12 and verse 2, but the Bible specifically says it. In John 13, verse 15, when Jesus had just washed the disciples' feet, that night he's going to observe the Passover and then the next day be crucified, he says, I have given you an example that as I have done, so you also do. Now, it's not talking about that we ought to be washing feet, because, by the way, there are some in the religious world that think that's a church ordinance. By the way, they're called the free will of that nature, like Free Will Baptists. That's exactly what part of their practice. Okay? Washing feet. Jesus was not teaching people to wash feet. Washing feet was a cultural item of that day. What he was teaching was humility. I've shown you an example of humility. Slaves, the lowest of a household, wash people's feet. And if I be your master, if I be the head of you and I wash your feet, then get off this idea of who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven and get down here and serve. By the way, when Jesus was going to wash Peter's feet, what did Peter tell him? Just stirring up your remembrance. What did Peter tell him? You don't wash my feet. What did Jesus tell him? If I don't, you have no part with me. I'm not real sure Peter understood that at that point. I think he did later. Peter didn't think he would ever make some of the big blunders he made that night and even possibly down the road. But he did, and he learned from them. Listen, we're not here to talk about how we're going to be complete followers, perfect followers of the perfect example of Jesus Christ. We're here to try. Y'all get that, right? God isn't expecting sinless perfection out of you and me. He's expecting us to try, and to try as hard as you possibly can. And when you mess up, admit you messed up and get back on the path. Don't you as parents and grandparents expect that out of your kids and grandkids? By the way, you expect your grandkids, because they're already perfect, they can't do any wrong, right? But don't you expect that out of your kids? Let me ask you a question, those of you that are parents. Did you know before the doctor ever said you're expecting a child, maybe that first one, did you know that child was going to grow up to be a sinner if it grew up at all? Come on, shake or nod. My daddy's expression was shake or nod. Did you know that child was going to grow up to be a sinner? By the way, did you grow up to be a sinner? Yeah, you did. I did too. Okay? Did you and I expect them to do things that they shouldn't be doing, and they didn't do things they should be doing? Yeah, we expected that. Well, what did we expect out of them? When you make a mistake, admit you did wrong and try to do better. And really, the goal of life is to do what the Lord wants you to do. I'm to bring you up in the nurture and the admonition of who? Dr. Benjamin Spock? No. Of the Lord, right? Who's the standard? The Lord is the standard. Okay? So let's very quickly talk about three areas. We'll ultimately get to the cross. Let's talk about the concept of serving. That Jesus is our example of sacrifice and serving. Serving. Did you know actually you got to pay somewhat of a price to serve other folks? Sometimes you just got to swallow your own pride. And some folks aren't willing to do that. All right. You mean tell me I'm going to let them get in line ahead of me? You've lost your mind. They're the first ones to get in the fellowship line every time, and I'm going to fix that. As soon as that amen said, I'm going to be the first one in line and let them be at least second. I've stood back and watched that all these years. You think I'm ever going to hold the door open for that one right there? You don't know what that said about my grandchild. You can hold the door for that person all you want to. Is that our Lord? Well, I'm going to tell you that's some of my brethren, but that's not our Lord. So we're going to talk about sacrifice and serving. Second, we're going to talk about sacrifice and submission. Because, by the way, there's a lot of folks out here that want to serve God, they just don't want to obey God. And there is somewhat of a difference between serving God and obeying Him. We'll talk about that in a minute. Of course, last of all, we'll talk about giving your life. Because, by the way, that's what He wants. And He won't take it from us. He won't take it from us. He wants us to give it willingly. Willingly. Okay? So let's talk about service. In the 10th chapter of Acts, in verse 38, the Apostle Peter, in this case, preaching to the household of Cornelius, basically said of Jesus that He went everywhere doing good. Everywhere doing good. Oh, by the way, what are you and I to do? Let your light so shine before men that they may see your Come on, finish the verse. Good works, glorify your Father which is in heaven. Now, did Jesus ever ask us to do something he wasn't going to do himself? No. He did first, and then he taught people what to do. In other words, if you want to know what I'm talking about, just watch me. That would be what he would say. I'm your example. I'm not going to expect of you to do something I'm not going to do myself. By the way, isn't that what parents are supposed to do to their kids? I'm not asking you to clean up the house if I'm not going to clean up the house. By the way, have you ever had your kid to challenge you in that? You're asking me to clean up a room and I ain't seen you make a bed a day in your life. You're telling me to make up my bed? Oh yeah, get your steel-toed shoes out tonight because you're going to need them tonight. Because y'all get this, right? Sometimes kids will say, well, you don't do it. Why are you expecting me to do it? Well, I'm your daddy. You live under my house. You live under my rules. You've heard that before. Did you live that before? Said it before. Yeah, you live under my roof. You live under my rules. Sort of the RR there. Okay? By the way, imagine living under Jesus' feet for 3.5 years. Peter, Andrew, James, John, Philip, Thomas, they all lived under Jesus' feet for 3.5 years. By the way, do you know these college football players can get an undergraduate degree in 3.5 years? Do y'all know these D1 athletes can get a college degree in 3.5 years? How do they do that? They go through the summer too, don't they? Take summer classes. Y'all ever thought about Peter, Andrew, James, and John getting a 4-year college degree at the feet of Jesus Christ? How would you like an education for 3.5 years sitting at the feet of Jesus Christ? By the way, what if he gave you a test? How would you pass that one? By the way, don't think he didn't, and it wasn't in written form. That'd be tough, wouldn't it? Pretty sure Ron, being a Bible major, had William Woodson. Didn't you have Brother Woodson? I had him for several classes. I'm going to tell you something, that man was hard. As a matter of fact, most people that weren't Bible majors, everybody had to have a Bible class, by the way, at Freed-Hardeman. It didn't matter what your major was. Do you know who the teacher most of them avoided at Freed-Hardeman? If you had to have a Bible class, you avoid William Woodson at all costs. There's a good reason for that. Real good reason. That man was hard. Oh, wait, Brother Woodson, before he died, was one of the best friends I had. When my daddy died, Brother Woodson became my daddy. If I ever ran into a situation, I called his telephone number in Lawrenceburg, Tennessee. I had it memorized. By the way, now he's dead. I got another gentleman I called. His name's David Sane. This congregation ever heard of David Sane? That's the guy who I call. By the way, if something happens to David, I don't know what I'm going to do. Maybe calling you, all right? If you give me your telephone number, okay? Service. How many times did Jesus serve people and they didn't want to serve him back? When Jesus fed the multitudes of loaves and the fishes in John 6, and then later on he goes away and they start looking for him, and then when he comes back and Jesus says, you seek me not because you saw the miracles, but because you did eat of the loaves and were filled. Labor not for the meat that perishes, and on down, and he starts talking about, I am the bread from heaven. By the way, in John 6:66, in that same chapter, it says, from that time, many of his disciples walked no longer with him. In other words, you going to feed our belly? We out of here. Y'all got a church pantry here at Lincoln? You ever had anybody come up here wanting to serve the church at Lincoln, or they just come up here wanting food out of the pantry? By the way, do you give them food out of the pantry? Yeah, you do. What are you hoping they connect the dots with? What are you hoping? I served you because of the Lord who's changed my life to serve you. I didn't know you from Adam's house cat, but you showed up in here claiming you had need, so I helped to serve you because my Lord served me. Now you need to connect the dots and learn that while you did get some canned goods or whatever, that you need to get in the service business. How many people do you know get in the service business? Okay, now ladies, what about these young couples that not real strong members of the church, may not be members of the church at all, but all of a sudden you find out they're getting married. What do the ladies of this church do? They got to get married. What do y'all do? What do we do in the South? Give them a shower. And after you've spent all that time and you're buying the presents and you're gussying up the room and so forth, and after you give them the shower and you go to their wedding and so forth, and next thing you know, you don't see them for 6 months to a year and a half to 2 years. All of a sudden they show back up all of a sudden. You know where I'm going, don't you, ladies? Because now we're fixing to have our first child. What are you ladies going to do? We're going to give them a shower, baby shower. Next thing you know, you give them a baby shower. Comes time, okay, and you call them on the phone. Hey, how's the baby? Well, the baby didn't sleep well last night. We lost a lot of sleep. When he gets old enough or she gets old enough, we'll be at services. We promise you. How many of y'all heard that song and dance? I can't tell you how many times. Maybe I'm jaded, you know. But I think there's a lot of folks out here that want the church just to be a fix-it shop. They don't want to serve God. They want to be served by God and God's people, shake or not. I sort of feel that way sometimes. By the way, it's not true of everybody. Out of all the people who've ever come through the Bethel Church of Christ wanting help, we did receive one thank you letter out of 31 years now. One thank you letter for the church having helped them. By the way, that does sort of restore your faith in humanity, don't it? But the whole idea is what? The Lord served us to teach us how to serve other people. Look not on your own things, but on the things of others. Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of the Greek word is doulos, it meant a slave. Took upon himself the form of a slave. When Jesus washed the disciples' feet, that was the form of a slave, folks. By the way, the other verse in the Bible that uses Jesus as an example is 1 Peter 2, verse 21. For whereunto were you also called, because Christ suffered for us, leaving us an example that we should follow in his steps. I'll come back to that one in a minute. That's a very important passage in the third point of this lesson. But by the way, it does take sacrifice to serve, don't it? To fix food for people who've had funerals, who've had deaths in their family. Does that take a sacrifice on your part, ladies or gentlemen or whatever? By the way, what if you got 3 or 4 funerals in a week? Does it sort of tax on you? That all of a sudden you're fixing the same food? Hey, folks have got to quit dying. We're running out of pantry food here. By the way, I had a lady one time says, I'm tired of fixing for this funeral. We got too many of them we've had this week. I'm like, aren't you glad to serve? By the way, didn't the Lord serve us when we didn't deserve it? Doesn't he keep on serving us when we don't deserve it? By the way, do we think it's really not a sacrifice of God to serve us? It's God's resources he's given us. I think sometimes we just need to slow down, take a deep breath, and just stop and think about what we really have received from God and ask ourselves the question, am I being selfish? Or do I understand what he's blessed me with, I'm to bless other people with? So that's point number 1 of this lesson tonight. Now let's go to point number 2, submission. Submission. The bottom part of Philippians 2 says, he took upon himself the form of a servant, was made in the likeness of men. Of course, the emphasis being form of a slave. He's fashioned himself as a servant. And he became obedient unto death. Obedient unto death. But that's not all that verse says, right? Even the death of the cross. You know, we're all, if the Lord don't come back in our lifetime, we're all going to die from something. Y'all know that? My mother and daddy died with cancer. That's what took them out of the world. Who knows, I may die from cancer. It's not that I haven't had it before, because I have. I've had surgery, got it taken out. Right now, as far as I know, everything's fine. But when the C word comes up, you generally start thinking about your mortality. Trust me, it happens. We got a girl right now, she's, I guess, 19 years old, right over here at the Women's Children's Hospital, had cancer of the thyroid, had her surgery on Monday. She's now at home today. And she's recovering from that. In 6 weeks, they'll determine with a full body scan whether they got it all or not. You reckon the family's curious about whether they got it all or not? You reckon she is? Faithful young Christian lady we got at Bethel. Her name's Mariah Hatfield. She was at camp last week. Matter of fact, she'd rather been at camp last week than to have surgery last week to take her thyroid out. She said, I got something important I want to do before I have my thyroid operated on. Well, what is that? I want to go to Bible camp. How many of y'all, the very idea of going to Bible camp is just nauseous? Bugs, hot. You get about 1 day's sleep out of 5 days down there. You got to deal with whiny, snoring people in your cabin. By the way, raise your hand if you ever been to Bible camp. Greatest place on earth, isn't it? Make you sweet, make you clean. Man gets up and going to talk about serving all week long. You need to hold the door open for these kids. Why? These kids are just running around here pestering the life out of me. Hold the door open for that little kid. That kid looks up to you. You don't know it. You don't realize it. Say something to that kid. You make that kid's day if you just say, hey, how are you doing? How'd you sleep last night? Huh? You talking to me? I wanted you to talk to me, but you talking to me? Yeah. Do you reckon Jesus would talk to small kids? Would he talk to lepers? Would he talk to women that are vile sinners, like harlots? Then what am I supposed to do? You get a visitor that comes into this building, and y'all know one another as members. Total stranger comes in this building. You ever stood back and just watched how a membership does when a visitor comes into a building? Come on, be honest. You ever just watched what we do as a people? Who's that? Oh, you know him? I don't know him. Look at this. They get in my pew. We had a lady at Bethel not long after I moved there actually told a visitor, you got my pew, you'll have to move. And they got up and moved to the pew in front of them. By the way, now those very visitors are a deacon and a deacon's wife in our congregation. But they said, you want me to tell you what my very first impression of the Bethel Church of Christ was? It was this lady, and he called her by name, telling me I got her pew and I had to get up and move. Would the Lord ever tell you, you got my pew, you'll have to move? Can y'all see the Lord saying that? And bless her heart, she's with the Lord right now. That's my brethren. Oh, well, that is your brethren too. They just don't happen to be here at Lincoln. Submission. Jesus didn't die of old age. He didn't die of an accident. He willingly died on the cross. Submission. Though he were a son, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered, and being made perfect or complete, he became the author of eternal salvation to all them that obey him. What is that? Here's your example of obedience, and here's what you and I are to do. By the way, let's talk about obedience. Do you know when that small child comes out of that womb and somebody smacks him on the backside or her on that backside? They're screaming for need and want and help and been screaming ever since. You ever seen how a 6, 7, 8-month-old child, all they got to do is just, and all of a sudden 19 people jump up and figure out what to do? Here's a child hadn't talked in 2 years. Hadn't talked in 2 years. Don't have to. All they got to do is grunt and you jump at every beck and call. Why don't you have to learn how to tell you what he wants? It's pretty bad. You're pretty harsh. No, I'm just being truthful. We got an 8-month-old grandson right now. We got an 8-year-old grandson. And we got an almost 6-year-old granddaughter who thinks she's 60. Okay? She's the queen of the universe as far as my wife is concerned. And some days I wonder if my wife even has a brain in her head. Because she has wrecked our house more times than not, and it's taken me anywhere from 3 to 6 hours to straighten up one playroom. Just one. Not counting the rest of the house. Y'all ever stepped on a Lego barefooted in the middle of the night going to the bathroom? Then you know how I feel. And I look at those little darling angels that my Lord would bless, and I say, Papa C says, before you go home, by the way, I am Papa C, you're to clean that floor up. I'm not going to do it anymore. By the way, the next time I clean it up, I put it up, you'll never see it again. Mama C, he wouldn't do that, would he? No, darling, he wouldn't do that. Try me. Just try me. It takes time to pick all that up. But who made that mess? Well, I did. Then you're going to clean it up. It's called responsibility. Trust me, an 8-year-old kid can learn that. And a 6-year-old kid can learn that. By the way, they're school age, they better be learning it. By the way, my wife teaches first grade. I write off some of these kids in her class on my income tax as dependents because I hear their name in my house at the supper table almost every day of the school year. Last year, I wrote James's name on there as a dependent because I'm sure he lived at my house. Y'all get it, right? And my wife comes home and says, these kids don't listen. These kids don't want to do what they do hear from you. And I am having blood pressure issues. And she is. Why don't they just do what I tell them to do? Because they don't get it. And maybe their parents don't get it. My wife had a mother who decided that my wife giving homework to her first grade child was too much. And this mother went to the principal of Creekside Elementary School and basically told the principal that my wife was the worst teacher that's ever walked in a classroom. And the principal comes into my wife's classroom and basically tells her, these are things you've got to stop doing for your whole class. And that's the world we're living in, folks. Though he were a son of God, yet learned he obedience by the things which he suffered. Now let me ask you a question. If the Son of God had to learn obedience by suffering, you pray tell how I'm going to learn it. And you pray tell how you're going to learn it. Dr. Benjamin Spock years ago wrote books that basically said, not only do you not spank them, you don't even tell them no. You don't want to warp their personality. Trust me, that's exactly what I'm trying to do is warp your personality. That's what I'm trying to do. For 10 years, I was a Boy Scout scoutmaster for a troop at East Limestone. And I go off on a camp out, and I know where my stuff is because I packed it, and I know what I'm going to cook because I brought it, knew how to cook it, and so forth. And I'm sitting down here and it's dark. By the way, I brought a flashlight because I knew the sun was going to go down in the woods. And it's going to get dark. Little boy comes up to me, he can't find anything. By the way, the reason he can't find anything is his mama packed it all. So he can't find anything because he didn't pack any of it. He walks up to me and says, Mr. Clark, says, you have a flashlight? I said, absolutely I do. Here, I turned it on. He said, can I borrow it? I said, no, I need it. Where's yours? Well, I didn't pack it. I said, why not? Didn't you know it was going to get dark? You're not going to let me borrow your flashlight? I said, no. No, I'm going to let you borrow this. You'll walk off somewhere and lay it down, and then you won't have it and I won't have it either. I said, you'll remember next time, won't you? Guess I will. By the way, next time he packed 3 flashlights. By the way, he learned obedience by the things which he suffered. Let me ask you a question. How did you learn life's major lessons? Did you learn them the easy way? Or did you learn them when you suffered? Come on, be honest. And Jesus knew the cross was in front of him from the very time, likely before he even started his earthly ministry. My hour is not yet come. He knew what that meant. I'm going to die. I'm going to die at 34 years old. I'm going to die. And they're not going to take my life from me. I'm going to give it up. And when I do that, I'm expecting the whole world to understand what that's about. I've showed you how to serve humanity. I've showed you how to submit to the will of God every day that you live. If you'd watched me, you'd see me do the will of my Father. And by the way, you can't go to heaven without doing the will of the Father. Y'all know that? Not everyone that says unto me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven. Well, who will enter the kingdom of heaven? He that does the will of the Father. Read that in a book somewhere. That's Matthew 7:21, isn't it? Sermon on the Mount. Our Lord said that. And Jesus went to the cross. Of all the things that Jesus suffered on the cross, you know, the pain, the agony, the dehydration, to me the toughest thing is in one of the 7 statements he made on that cross. And here's the statement he made. My God, why hast thou forsaken me? By the way, he's quoting Psalm 22, verse 1, if you didn't know that. But I believe he meant that. Tell me a time in the existence of the Son of God, before he became flesh and after he became flesh. Tell me a time when the Father ever abandoned his Son. When did the Father ever do that? Wasn't a time, right? Upon the heels of him saying, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which meant, my God, why? It says then that he said with a loud voice, Father, into thy hands I commit my spirit. He knew he was at the last few breaths before he breathed his last. And so he cried out, knowing, you're going to let me die. You literally are going to let this happen. And the next breath was, then into your hands I commit my spirit. Romans 12:1 says, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your logical, it says reasonable King James, but the word there is logia, logical service. Listen, if Jesus showed us how to die, to obey the will of the Father, then not any price you and I ought not be willing to pay. By the way, the Muslims believe it, don't they? Don't the Muslims get on airplanes crying out, Allahu Akbar, and fly them right into the Twin Towers in New York? Will they die for their cause? Will they? But that's not the question. The question is, will you and I die for this cause? Stephen did, Acts 7. Paul did, 2 Timothy 4. But two snowflakes can be forecasted on a December Sunday morning, and my brethren can't get up out of bed and come to church. Do you think if two snowflakes will stop them, you think they'd give their life for that cause? They need a checkup from the neck up. And we need to do some soul searching among our people. This is worth your life. This is worth dying for. He died for you that you might live. By the way, if you do die, you only win. All your troubles and trials are over. You go be with the Lord. So he is our example of sacrifice and service and submission. Die on that cross. So take up your cross and follow him. Thank you for your attention.